right. I'm with Elizabeth Grace Matthew, everybody. Thank you for coming to Walk-Ins Welcome. Very excited to talk to you. I wanted to have you on the show this week because your Substack, What Are Grown-Ups For, is relevant to pretty much everything we're living through and everything we're up against. For those of you who don't know, you should go check out her Substack. It's in the link in the description of this video. I find you to be brilliant. You have your finger on the pulse of culture, faith, parenthood, maturity, femininity, so many feminism, politics, so much of the stuff that we are all conversing about in the discourse. So I'm excited to talk to you about how you got here, what your take is on everything. I think as I talk to you today in this moment, what's very interesting to me is the dynamic of Erica Kirk is kind of where a lot of these things that you write about are meeting. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then how you got into writing about all this.
Thank you so much, Bridget. It's just so great to be here with you. I'm a longtime reader and listener, so it's just such a pleasure to be here. I actually started down a pretty traditional academic path many moons ago, and learned some life lessons along the way related to some of the things I write about why that wasn't going to work out for my other life plans and prospects. But I got into writing through just kind of going freelance at it at a Catholic magazine, American Magazine, about 7-8 years ago, a couple articles here and there. And when I was in a position to freelance full time, I quit my full-time academic job when my third kid was a year old, because, as you know, it's very hard to manage toddler illnesses and full-time work. And I had 2 older ones at that point. And so that's when I started freelancing full-time. And I kind of came up on the normie left, if that makes sense. Like I was, in blue Philadelphia. I came up through higher ed. And in the mid-2010s, things started to go, really crazy, as we all know. And so I kind of was inspired to start thinking about how this happened because, on the normie left in the 2000s, things weren't by any means that crazy. And so I started thinking about questions of how, in particular, women's issues had been co-opted to sort of infantilize women. And I think that has always been a temptation, going all the way back to the 19th century. If you think about what I actually studied in academia originally, before I moved into just kind of teaching writing to, pay the bills and keep things rolling, was 19th century American literature. And, when you talk about that era and that type of literature, there's a ton of, women are feeling centered and they're virtuous and all that kind of stuff that happens around and sort of co-ops some of the earliest well-intentioned proto-feminist impulses. And so I kind of had that background coming in and then saw, oh, wow, we're really infantilizing women from the feminist vantage point today, in all kinds of respects. And I know you talk about that quite a bit as well.
Yeah, give us some idea of the ways in which we are infantilizing women from the feminist perspective.
Yeah, thank you. So, I think the idea, and Louise Perry's written quite a bit about this, I know you've spoken with her, the idea that you can biochemically alter everything about your relationship to sex and to motherhood in ways that are going to essentially make you function in the way men typically have. And that just has proven to be not as correct as we might have thought it was. But if you think about it, it's always been kind of a lie, right? That the idea that you're going to be able to have your cake and eat it too, the idea that there won't be trade-offs, that's not true in any aspect of life, right? And then sort of also, one thing I think about, I don't know if you saw the movie, your daughter's probably a little bit young for it, the movie Turning Red.
No, we won't let her watch
the Disney
that.
film. But yeah, so I haven't let my sons watch it either. It is, have you watched it? It is wild. So it's this idea that female self-expression is by definition virtuous, right? So the idea that the unfiltered expression of your rage, and this was sort of a big thing after Trump won the first time with the handmaids outfits and, you know, all these types of things, the unfiltered and completely socially inappropriate expression of female rage is somehow good. Whereas we would never think that for male rage. In fact, we would think that it's abusive, bad, toxic, and in many cases, rightfully so. But the idea that we're going to hold women to sort of a lower standard because their feelings have the weight of virtue, this goes back to a really pretty unflattering idea of women as like childlike sacred vessels. And I think it's kind of been co-opted by an ostensibly progressive move to empower women.
Everything feels so crazy right now. It feels like, again, I really am interested in your take on Erica Kirk and this, you know, there's lots of tweets going around that are like, this is, kind of criticizing feminism and using her. And I'm interested to see how her ascent as the CEO of Turning Points is going to be welcomed by the quite, you know, male leaning audience that he cultivated. And oftentimes saying, like, you know, you have to submit, these kind of very common evangelical ways of speaking. What's your take on this moment right now with her on the right in particular?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, obviously, the grief and the weight of this time has implications that go so far beyond like the feminist conversation. But I think so that obviously colors it to some extent, right? Like we're looking at a widow who just lost her husband in this heinous way with these two young children. And obviously, that's the first lens we have to look through. But I think that our conversation about feminism has become so like meaningless, right? These labels almost mean nothing when they can mean everything. So on the one hand, right, there's a long history that goes back to like Phyllis Schlafly of women who are themselves professionally out there saying that women need to not be professionals. So that's, you know, one sort of take that I think, you know, Erica Kirk will be quite smart enough to avoid being slammed with the full weight of that. But I think that there's that impulse of people on the left then to say, hey, you're a hypocrite, right? But I also think that what unites trad wife impulse that a lot of the audience might be sympathetic to, and then the sort of progressive feminism that, if we're being honest, right? I mean, Erica Kirk was a professional woman before she got married. She had the choice to get married and to, you know, put her career on hold and all these things. I mean, there's a lot that second wave feminism did to achieve that. And while it may have had premises that were absolutely false baked in, that doesn't mean that everything it achieved shouldn't have also been achieved a different way, right? Like we could have had different premises and achieved some of the same outcomes, which I think is what a lot of, I would say, sort of the conservative feminists, and I would not reject that label for myself. Like a lot of people like that sort of understand we need to be really pluralistic in how we look at women. Of course, there are going to be women who are called to work, called to mother, called to do both, called to do them at different times. You know, this is a really evolving reality. And the stay at home, go to work, girl boss, trad wife, binary is really sort of antiquated and not helpful. So I think that if she can embody some degree of that pluralism, like, look, I'm called to do different things at different times. There are ways in which I prioritize my children. There are ways in which I prioritize my career. These things don't have to be all or nothing. I think the ratcheting down of our labels conversation would serve everyone. Because I don't know about you, I feel like the trad wife and the girl boss are sort of both these curated images that almost are themselves the work, if that makes sense, more than the actual work is.
Yeah, I have so many thoughts about this. It's because I don't actually think anyone represents a normal woman in the media. like they're
Exactly.
really just
Exactly.
maybe,
Yeah.
and if they are, they're not like a dominant figure. So it's, or you're this weird conservative, like the conservative women who try to represent normal women and espouse these kind of biblical roles and the role of the wife. Like you're still out there with a microphone. You are like,
Yes.
what do you, trad wife
Right.
isn't showing off her tits baking on Instagram, like there. Well, and you have this
Right.
kind of trad wife aesthetic of homesteading that makes it look very easy. And you're like, it's not just
Yes.
wearing a sundress and baking sourdough. Like homesteading is so much freaking work.
Yes.
And even me, who's a city girl, has worked on enough farms to know how much work it is and how hard it is when there are only women doing this kind of work. And then I also feel the instinct of like, okay, there's been a lot of women who have this is something that I've really tried to embrace and get allow seep into my soul in Texas is going to these ranches. And I went to the Texas Women's Hall of Fame the first year that I was here. And there was a woman whose husband died, and she still woke up
Oh, that's
every
cool.
morning and she took care of the cows. And she was talking about how Texas women are just built different because their husbands would have to go away for, she's like, can you imagine what it was like to keep up this homestead alone
Mm-hmm.
when it was the Wild
Mm-hmm.
West and the early pioneering days of America, and your husband's off doing whatever with the cattle, and you are just alone taking
Yeah.
care of all of this land with a shotgun. Like these women are just, it's like a
Yes.
different breed of women in Texas. So I think that the women that have stood behind the men who have kind of built this country are much tougher than they are presented by the modern trad wife aesthetic.
The modern trad wife soft girl thing, right, is really not traditional at all. Right. There's nothing traditional about that. And I know that Mary Harrington has said this in like Feminism Against Progress, et cetera. But the problem with this traditionalism is that it's not trad enough. What you're talking about, that pre-modern way of being where, first of all, work and home are integrated by necessity. So there's not this binary that we start all losing our minds over fighting about when it really never existed until like, industrialization. And then that's when industrialization happened in the mid 1800s. And that forced poor women to be more different from upper class women than they had been theretofore, right? So if I work on an upper middle class farm and my husband can hire some hands, maybe I have a slightly different life than somebody who works on more of a subsistence farm and whose husband is doing everything himself and she's helping. But we kind of are both in the same general boat, even though maybe one of us is in, steerage and one of us is on the upper deck. But when you get industrialization, you get men go to work and women keep the home, and this fetishization of domesticity that I think was never true before. And then it comes to stand in for a type of virtue that goes along with, the godly feeling and all this sort of performative softness that has never served women, certainly doesn't serve women now, exactly as you're saying, right? And I think those of us that are performing it, really it's a performance, it's a business. And for the people who are actually doing some homesteading, they don't have time to perform, I'm doing submission and having my morning tea and my life is about relaxation. I mean, that's just not what American womanhood has ever been about. And I think, again, the sort of bifurcated nature of this conversation where everyone's pointing fingers at the other people has really never been part of this. I did a piece on Lean In a while ago, Sheryl Sandberg's, which is sort of the performance on the other side of like, I'm the boss babe. And well, you're a boss babe because you hired a staff of 12 to 15 people that, feed your kid and take care of your home and do all these things. And the vast majority of women aren't trying to lean in or out. They're just trying to pay the bills.
They're
And
surviving.
they're
Yeah.
surviving and they're trying to thrive as much as they can, but they're not like coming into it with this idea of, let me show you with my performance of self what label I fit. And I think maybe on both the right and the left to some degree, that one of the things that might set me a little bit apart, that gave me a little bit of perspective on this, is when I left academia as an advanced graduate student and said, this is not for me, I cannot fight with people about obscure things in books for the rest of my life, and moved to 12 states to do it. Like, I'm going to go back home to Philadelphia and settle down and raise a family. And I went looking for jobs. I was looking for jobs. Like, I just thought, okay, let me get on a campus where I can teach writing and have good benefits so my husband can work and I can be the primary caregiver to our kids, but also have an income. I mean, that's more how most people are oriented, right? They're kind of looking for the best they can do within the parameters that are available. They're not trying to embody some curated Instagram identity.
I think the Instagram identity is so hard on women too, because it gives them this false idea that you can do it all. Like, you'll see these reels that are like, my routine, and it's like, you wake up at 5 a.m. and then you do this skincare routine, and then you do this crazy workout, and then you're making little bento boxes for people. And I have a sister who works in, she's like a personal organizer on the East Coast. And she's a genius, and she works for a lot of influencers, and she is like, I'm like, I keep begging her to write like the help version of this influencer behind the scenes, and all the people who actually make their houses look organized. Like, it's people like my sister.
I believe it.
Like, they just like open their cabinets and they're all organized, and it's like, and here's my little like cheap bento box that has like and by the way, I know moms who live up to this aesthetic and try and do this, but it is like, I'm barely hanging on. I mean, I think it's so appropriate that you and I both have wet hair for this interview.
Have wet hair, right?
I'm going to start the wet hair moms unite. Like, here I am trying to my kid's coming home. I promised her I'd take her to the pool. I've got a business I'm running, and I love cooking. So I made a bunch of food before we had this interview, and then I need to get some kind of workout in so that I don't go crazy. And I went for a walk, and it's like, I think most women are living like this. They're just like trying to keep it all together.
Absolutely. And I think that, exactly as you said, there's not a lot of images of us in like of the way that your house should look, and spending all of your attention on really trivial things. If we're being honest, right? Like, why does it matter that much? A lot of it doesn't matter that much. But then also kind of neglecting some of the most important things through a way of doing things that does not serve your children. So like gentle parenting, I'm thinking of, right? All the Insta and TikTok reels of like, here's how you're going to narrativize with your child every time you want them to put their shoes on. And it's, nobody can actually do that and survive in a normal way, first of all. Second of all, you're disserving the child quite badly in all kinds of ways. But third of all, and perhaps most importantly, you're setting up a completely unrealistic expectation for how you can live. And I've actually heard from several younger women than me. I'm 37, about to be 38, and women in their late 20s, early 30s who are saying, oh, I can't have kids because it's too hard, because, it takes an hour to get them out the door. And it doesn't if you just tell them to put their shoes on.
No, it doesn't take an hour to get them out the door if you just tell them to put their fucking shoes on and get out the door.
Precisely, right?
Maybe minus the F word,
but you can't say
like,
that.
You do have to just be like, put your shoes on, and I'm the authority here.
Depends on the age. Right. Maybe 8 and up for that. Right. But no, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder about gentle parenting in particular for boys. Like that's I have a daughter. So she's 3.5. So she's feeling those big feelings at 3.5-year-olds. I always want to I have to stop myself from laughing, because I'm not laughing at her, but it's just so funny when they have just a meltdown because you accidentally opened some, you didn't cut the apple the right way, or you did cut the apple, or it's like just the end of the world meltdowns for these things. They're so hilarious. I no one prepared me for how funny that is. And
no, and it is, but and you're going to have an hour-long conversation about her feelings. I mean, that would be such a disservice to her, right? Because she should be spending 45 minutes of that hour after tantruming, playing or doing something else, having moved on. I have 4 boys, and so I have a take on it that, certainly reflects that. I think it's really bad for kids to think that their feelings are the center of the world. It's very good for kids to think that they are the center of their parents' world, but not their feelings, more their goodness. And I actually have kind of an empathetic take on why we do gentle parenting, right? Are you a very young Gen Xer?
No,
or are you an
I'm
older
probably
millennial?
on the cusp. Yeah. I think I'm like an X. I'm in that like Xennial, the weird like bridge gap.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm an old millennial, and I think a lot of us were raised. I know you've written about divorce. Yeah. I know you've written about divorce, right? And there was so much divorce among my parents are still together, but there was so much divorce among, friends' parents. There was also just so much less social capital than our parents had when we were children, right? So we grew up more anomic than our parents did. Like, they grew up in a place where they could walk to the houses of so many people they knew. They had social density. They were more churched, all that kind of stuff. And so I think my speculation as to why millennials are so obsessed with gentle parenting is that they feel like when their parents were mad at them, it was the end of the world, because their parents were the only authority figures that had any real authority in their lives. There weren't as many grandparents living nearby. There weren't as many pastors and coaches integrated into the wider family and village, right? And so as the village is thinned out, it's like, oh, now my mom yelling at me like really hurts my feelings, because there's no one else that I'm looking to for that stability. There's no dilution of that parental authority. And so parenting's really hard under those circumstances. And so millennials take that really personally, and they say, okay, well, my feelings were totally disregarded, so now I'm not going to do that to my child. And instead of thinking, okay, let me learn how to, have authority that's not authoritarian. Let me learn how to be somewhat more patient. Let me build back in some of the village. Let me go to church and host barbecues and, build back in some of these other centers of adult authority to say, no, I'm going to take it on all myself. And instead of making my feelings the center, I'm going to make my child's feelings the center. And that just is even crazier than what our parents did, because 2-year-olds are crazier than 32-year-olds.
Some of them.
Right.
I don't know, actually. In today's world. Yeah, it is like wild to see a lot of because I guess we're seeing the gentle parenting generation, those kids starting to kind of grow up. And it does seem like adulthood keeps getting pushed later, the moment you're supposed to grow up. But then also, there's lots of science that shows the prefrontal cortex isn't really developed until you're 25 anyway. So I wrestle with is this like, were we just surviving for a long time? This was the natural way things were because this was the way things had to be. You had to grow up before you were really a grown up in pre-modern society. And now that things are a little more comfortable and easier, you can actually take your time growing up and as your brain develops. Or is this a disservice to, I don't know. Like I go back and forth because I was kind of just like, here you go at 18, and I don't know that I made a lot of great choices.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a both end, right? So I think a lot. I want to get back to what you said about boys too, because I think they are different, right? And I think there are differences that really play in here. I think that building back the social fabric through community and institutions is imperative, because if you don't have that, whether you're 18 or 48, you're going to struggle,
as we say.
right? And we see that with people, especially males in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, having no social capital and struggling, deaths of despair, apathy, professional underachievement, political violence, right? All of these sorts of things that tend to beset males in that age group, the online gambling, the pornography, that sort of stand in for living in a way that enables you to actually pursue the things you want, these sorts of hedonistic or nihilistic distractions. And I think that is a lot of that is the loss of the social fabric. A lot of it is the secularization. A lot of it is that. I think that gentle parenting shows up a lot for boys. I notice my older sons are now 10 and 8, and then I have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. And what I notice with myself vis-a-vis my 10-year-old is that I'm now largely gentle parenting him. And like I've written articles, no gentle parenting, but that's because when he was 3, I treated him like a puppy. And 4 and 5, it's like, you have to comply. There's no discussion. Mm-hmm. There's not that there's no discussion, but obviously there can be discussion, but it's like one of the sayings, mantras we made them repeat over and over was first we listen, then we talk, right? So like first you do what I told you, then we can talk about why I told you it, but we're not going to like negotiate as we go, right? And I think with boys, there are kind of 2 male prototypes, and my oldest 2 are one of each. One is the sort of head in the clouds, spacey boy who, means well and is relatively gentle, doesn't get particularly aggressive, but he's kind of head in the clouds and needs to be brought down to an awareness that there are other people around him and that he needs to pay attention to them. And, that was my oldest, who every day as he got out of the car for kindergarten, what are you going to do today? I would say. And he would have to repeat back, finish my work and put it in the finished work bin, because his teacher had told me at his first conference, he's finishing all the work and he's doing it correctly. He's just never turning it in. So like we had that conversation daily. So he's one prototype. My second born is the other prototype, highly aware of what's around him, zest for leadership, likes to be in charge, and naturally quite aggressive. When you gentle parent either of those boys, you are setting them up for failure. The first one, because he's going to walk into danger. He's going to fail to achieve his potential. And we see that, right? They spiral because they don't get challenged, because they don't pay attention to where the challenges are available. And then the second one, because he's going to hurt people or get hurt himself by getting involved in physical altercations that he needs to learn how to avoid and how to exercise the virtue of self-control when he's angry. And I think, both of them would have been really disserved by gentle parenting. I think that more girls, not all, of course, there are girls that do fall into those categories, but girls, when they are aggressive, tend not to be as dangerous, for one thing. But second of all, and there's fewer of them that are so aggressive, but there are more girls that are kind of like my third born, who is both highly aware and not particularly aggressive. Now, he's a unicorn among boys. He kind of has the virtues of both his older brothers and really not so much the vices. He was a lucky third. I think the fourth is going to be the toughest of all. He was the trick third baby that makes you say, oh, we could do one more. But I think that, most boys fall into one of those prototypes to some degree. And so gentle parenting for them is particularly dangerous. And then the parents sort of take away from it. And this is where we get into the bad therapy, Abigail Shrier type of, situation. You wind up putting them in situations that create more problems in some cases. Not all cases. Obviously, some kids do need those supports. I'm not saying they don't. But when your natural impulse is to gentle parent and never assume any authority, and the first authority they see is somebody who is asking them questions that are really inappropriate, putting things into their head that you really don't want there, you can see how we spiral even further in some ways.
Parenting is so crazy now. It feels so insane. And I think there's so much more awareness about what kind of parent you are. I feel like my grandparents and even my parents to a certain degree weren't really, my parents maybe were the first generation that was really asking seriously that question. I don't feel like my grandparents were spending very much time obsessing about what kind of parents they were.
No.
I don't know that that's great either.
Not at all. No, I think it's really bad. I think like with everything, when you're living for the label, it's not a good deal for anybody, right? Because it makes you question the natural order of how things have always been. And obviously sometimes that's good, but when it's done for bad reasons. So like one of the points I try to make a lot in a lot of my writing and my Substack, and actually a book that I'm working on, is that we have started to valorize a type of youth culture where there is no authority. Right. So it's not just that people don't grow up, like your prefrontal cortex is not developed till 25. There is a reason why insurance premiums for driving are very high for young males in particular. That makes a lot of sense. Right. But when we're talking about the ways you should think, right, your respect for authority, the understanding that institutions probably often exist for a reason, and revolutions are often not the way to go in terms of, dealing with these things. On both the left and the right now, we've descended into this idea that we're going to have a utopia if we can just get our way with everything, because there are no trade-offs and everything will be perfect if only we run it.
Yeah.
And I think that's, really immature from sort of an intellectual and emotional standpoint, even though I totally understand that, you're always going to have immaturity, especially from 20-somethings when it comes to how they behave. Now I think you're getting it even from people in their 30s, 40s, 50s and beyond, in terms of not how they behave as much as how they think and what they teach young people to believe. And that's almost more dangerous, right? People who are behaving pretty much fine, but then espousing ideas that are not going to help the younger generations achieve the kind of maturity that lets them live in a sane and productive and peaceful way.
Yeah, this is one thing that drives me crazy when I see people, adults, like, I guess a good example would be Bill Burr, who is like, "Free Luigi." You're like, "Shut the fuck!" Like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Are you even thinking about what you're doing? You're like, it feels so immature to me to allow that to just go unchecked. As an adult, like, I get it when you're 21, 22 and you're a moron and you think you're right about everything and you are probably at the height of your revolutionary, energy.
Yep.
But when you're like a 40-something-year-old man, it just feels like you're just trying to be cool or something. Like, do you really want to unleash that on? It was interesting. I did on Dumpster Fire, we covered the Gen Z toppling their government in Nepal and in Indonesia, these young kids with all this revolutionary energy. And it is always like, in the late teens, early 20s that you have the most zeal for that kind of thing. And sometimes it is necessary and corrective. And other times you're just unleashing very immature people to go and destroy a lot of things that they have no interest in rebuilding. The cool thing about the Gen Z kids who overturn their government is there are all these TikTok videos of them cleaning up and rebuilding, and the days after they were willing to put the work in to rebuild, and that was their intention. I don't think people who are doing a lot of the destruction and kind of celebrating this assassination culture that seems to be on the rise have any intention of rebuilding in the aftermath of what comes from this.
No, because building takes structure and hierarchy and authority.
Right.
Right. And these are all of the things that they're tearing down. And so I think that one of the really dangerous things is, think of like Bob Dylan, that song that's like mothers and fathers, can't understand, I mean, they actually can understand just fine. And I think part of the problem is that we've now all adopted that youth culture mentality. The grownups have really lost their sense of moral clarity and confidence.
Why do you think that is?
And I think I was going to say, I think a lot of that has happened because of the guilt that was always used for good reason to topple structures in the past that were genuinely unfair. So you have the civil rights movement, you have second wave feminism. These things both persist into the 1960s. We basically have a society of adults in which the good guys win for the most part. Like, obviously there's plenty, left to be done in all kinds of ways, but the good guys pretty much win. And then by the time you get to the 70s, 80s, within the academy, right, it's peopled by individuals who have to proclaim that the good guys didn't actually win, because otherwise they wouldn't have anything to talk about, right, in terms of saying why everything is, oppressive and why structures are all bad, et cetera, et cetera. And the kids go through the academies, right? They go through colleges, especially the kids who are going to wind up influential, right? And so then you have this reality that comes about where the adults never want to be alienated from whatever the new thing is. And I think Mary Harrington gets at this really well in Feminism Against Progress, this idea that progress is always good, because the progress that they cut their teeth on was in fact good. And so we definitely there were people that resisted civil rights, and they were the bad guys, and we defeated them. There were people that resisted women being able to have equal pay for equal work, and we defeated them. And so now, do we want to be on the bad side? Do we want to be with the people who don't think that this next group of ostensibly marginalized can have what they're asking for? And so the question is never asked, is this a thing that's consistent with truth? The civil rights movement was. Second wave feminism, to an extent, was, despite some of the misguided premises. Well, a lot of the things that are being asked for, right? Let's free people who kill people in cold blood. Let's allow biological males to compete on sports teams that are made for women. Like, these are not things that make any degree of sense. And yet we have a leadership class that doesn't want to be alienated from what's progressive. And I don't mean necessarily politically progressive, but almost like cool, which, kind of takes, exactly as you said, which takes the same valence.
Yeah, I've seen this a lot in podcasting happening, where you have people who I used to largely respect, and now it feels like they're drifting into what is cool. They're trying to capture, you have the like audience that, what is it called? The audience everybody wants, the like 25-year-old to 40-year-old, usually males.
Yep.
And females, but they're drifting in this way that I feel lacks moral clarity, and is it's like it's like TikTok brain or something. Like you're just trying to be cool for these 20-year-olds, and it's like you grew out of this. You were a 20-year-old that went through this. You go through this, then you get older, then you grow out of it, and then you go, oh, those kids, they're just being 20, and you'll grow up and get your ass handed to you by life, and you'll see things that you didn't see when you were 20. You'll realize how hard it is to build a life, to take care of a home, to have a family, to be a parent, all of these things you didn't know. And then you will not necessarily maintain the status quo, because I think that's what the pushback would be, is you're a normie arguing for the status quo. But my argument is that like the status quo is pretty great. It's not that bad. There's obviously a lot that we can do. I think young people are right to be mad right now, because they aren't. What I see is a lot of people who are extremely wealthy and podcasting and media, who have made it, who are now trying to lead these kids in a direction that's slightly destructive and kind of undermines Western culture, America, and our values, because they don't really want to have to reckon with the fact that they are part of the problem. Like, instead of actually trying to help solve these problems, like how do we help these kids get a house, they'll just agitate the kids and make them hate like America or somewhere else in the West. It's very, and I see this on the right and the left now, and it's so it makes me wonder. I don't like it. Like, I think the kids have a right to feel frustrated, because the life that, but again, like, this is where gentle parenting comes in too, where I was like, so fucking what? Like, everybody acts like we're entitled to something, and this is where I really loved Charlie Kirk. We aren't entitled to shit. This was something I learned at like 19 years old, when I found myself in rehab, and I had to like, sure, I could blame a lot of my parents for this, but it's like I said to my cousin, at a certain point, I had to look around and go, all right, I'm an adult, and now I've got to like pick up the pieces and build my life. It doesn't matter how I got here. I just have to keep moving forward. And we're teaching these kids to just be so like, this is what we're owed. We're owed this house and we're owed this. And okay, yeah, a lot of the things right now, I would lay at the boomers' feet in terms of standing in the way of a lot of the younger generations being able to achieve the same things they did. But a lot of it is me going, all right, like, that's fucking life, dude. You don't grow up. Like, go make what you can of what you have. Play the cards you have. You might have seen him on Walk-Ins Welcome, but have you checked out Brad Palumbo's podcast, Brad versus Everyone? It's a 25-minute daily show where Gen Z journalist Brad Palumbo takes on the craziest ideas on the internet, in media, and in politics. Brad covers stories you won't hear about in mainstream media, from social media trends landing some young people in jail, to the progressive media darling whose public meltdown got her fired, to the TikTok boycott against Target that makes no sense. He also pushes back on far-left extremism in the LGBT community from the perspective of a moderate gay man. But Brad also isn't afraid to disagree with the GOP or push back on far-right commentators who take things too far. Listen to Brad versus Everyone on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I think it's so tough because, exactly as you're saying, those are great observations. But it's always hard when what you're trying to do is build an audience and give a facile narrative, right? To say, well, lots of things are true at once, right? So on the one hand, of course you should be angry, because the boomers have behaved in ways that weaponized culture wars so that they could stay in power instead of dealing with, right, some of the real issues that we actually could deal with, right, in terms of trying to make the American dream more accessible, more affordable, and also have some of the access to the life that they once had. One of the things they did was, on the economic side, you know, the lack of union, right, membership that used to provide that life for a lot of people, the sort of denigration on the more cultural side of non-college moving through the world in a way that would make money, right? They themselves, a lot of them did that, but then they all sent their kids to college and sort of thought, oh, not doing that doesn't make any sense. So we divested out of a lot of the blue collar skilled labor that can make a lot of money, right? So there's a lot, I mean, unions, regulations in terms of housing, right? Ezra Klein just wrote a book about this. I mean, there's a lot that could be done on both the economic side and then on the cultural side too, the secularization, the idea that every man is going to be their own church, right? We're all going to come up with our own set of values and then curate them and post them on Instagram and be like, this is what I am, as opposed to like, maybe it would be good to sort of have some commonality with other people, even if it's not perfect, even if you don't love every aspect of it, right? Even if it isn't, you know, what you might have come up with if you started all by yourself, right? There's this sort of fetishization of, well, it's all mine. It's perfect for me. It's my self-expression. And, you know, not everything has to be self-expression. Sometimes you can buy into something bigger than yourself. And I think that is a huge piece of it. But then on the other side, I think too, you know, you're exactly right. This campus radicalism that then is being perpetuated by people on both sides, this sort of victimology, this grievance. You see it on the left. Yeah, this grievance stuff. You see it on the left, right, with the protests on college campuses over Gaza, which, number one, right, when you've seen people go in and interview, they actually can't give the facts of the situation at all. So the people who are there don't even know why they're there. They just know they're there because somebody has a grievance that they've been told will give them the moral authority that their grandparents now had when they did civil rights. Or maybe that their grandparents didn't have because they were on the wrong side. Even
or maybe
better,
that their
right?
grandparents
because now we
had
get to
when they
really
were fighting Nazis. Yeah.
So, right. Yeah, that too. Right. Depending on how old the kids in question are. Right. Exactly. So you have that. And then you also have the sort of Andrew Sullivan point that we all live on campus now. The old understanding was, well, you'll grow up, you'll get over that. You'll learn to think straight. You'll learn to understand trade-offs. You'll learn that it's a really big, diverse country and that lots of multiple and competing interests will continue to exist and to do their thing, and you'll find your place within it, and life will go on. But now the economic bottom has genuinely fallen out in a lot of ways. And then on top of it, the kids want to bring the regulation, the safetyism, the security, and the infantilization of their campuses to the rest of us. And so now it's, well, I'm not safe working next to you. I mean, it's all, now I think that stuff has peaked and that we're, moving forward. But
I don't think it's peaked.
There are ways in which the right
keep saying that.
You don't think it's peaked?
Someone just got shot. Woke didn't die. It just got it's now shooting people. Like, I push back against this now because people are like, no, it's died. I'm like, did it? Because someone just got killed.
So I guess what I mean to say is I don't think it died. I don't think it's dead. What I mean that I think peaked is the sort of, we're all on campus now. You're making me unsafe with your microaggressions, so I can't work next to you stuff. I think the sort of endemic institutionalization of that, like Robin DiAngelo-esque way of seeing things, I think that has largely peaked. But what I will say, and I think this is really important though, I think that just because it's peaked in the wider culture doesn't mean that it goes away. So it continues to live in the gender studies departments on campuses, and frankly, the English departments, and increasingly the business schools on campuses, as though it has never peaked. And when those folks are isolated from the rest of the world, which they are, right? Because they don't consume any media that doesn't say exactly what they want to hear. It only gets crazier and crazier because now they don't have to contend with anybody, right? So it only gets crazier and crazier in the places where it continues. And then, of course, the craziest place of all is the mind of some crazy person who is going to go commit an act like just happened in Utah, right? So that obviously is the craziest place of all, is the mind of that person. But the hothouses where this stuff is still going to be perpetuated as though it is, by definition, the moral way to be, and under attack from people who are fundamentally immoral, which of course there's immorality on the right. I'm no fan of all kinds of things that go on the right, but that doesn't mean that you get to paint with a broad brush. And for these people though, the painting with a broad brush is the whole point, right? Because you can't do any intra-group variance. You can't do, well, like, I don't like Trump, but he said this one thing that was true. If he said it, it's not true. That's it. Right. And that's a really immature way to be.
Yeah. I don't think the center's holding. This is where I'm sitting today on whatever day this is. That's my general feeling. And if I'm kind of any bellwether, like what, if I'm some kind of example of the center not holding, being someone who's been called every name in the book for a decade now, I don't know that I feel like it's, even within me, I don't know that I feel like it's holding. I'm doing my best to maintain a Charlie Kirk like ability to meet people where they are, but increasingly it feels like it's not holding. What is your take on this as someone who has also been surfing that, I think, like trying to be reasonable, trying to look at both sides of things, trying to maintain your own balance in this equation? Where are you feeling yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that for me, the way in which it is not holding is that I feel that those of us who try to be reasonable are increasingly on an island, right? Because I think that the impulse is, now that the right has some measure of cool, the impulse is on that side to start canceling people and start, enforcing things by fiat is obviously extremely potent, right? And then on the left, I came up on the left. I kind of realized the limitations of a way of being that is always just onto, well, whoever the oppressed people is, those are my people. I kind of realized the limitations of that quite early because I came up in a family that was, they were Democrats, but they were sort of old school Democrats, and a lot like, conservative Democrats, Catholic Democrats, pro-life Democrats, right? And a lot of the people that I knew were not, right? And they had no coordinates for what had been just a decade ago the norm. And by the time I was growing up in the 90s. And so I kind of saw that very early. And then as I went into academia, I saw it get crazier and crazier, right? But the center at the time, when I was in academia, what was holding, when I was in grad school, you know, as late as the mid 2010s, what was holding to some extent was rigor, right? What was holding was some of the values that we'd all once shared that were so basic, we didn't even know we shared them. And then COVID is what really did that in, right? It was this all of a sudden, you know, I was teaching and it was like, well, my roommate has to test for COVID, so I don't have to turn the paper in, right? And you're like, excuse me, right? Like thinking of the times that I had like been like, well, I personally myself am extremely sick, but I have to turn this in because if I don't, I'm going to like, you know, just the expectations that sometimes circumstances aren't ideal and you have to just deal and you have to just make your way. And that type of expectation of grit was just gone. Right. And then it's like, okay, well, I guess people who are not in elite academia have it. They increasingly don't. Right. And so when I go to, you know, teach at schools where the kids are much more, I'm working 2 jobs and I'm putting myself through, I still saw a lot of the same expectations that were very, you know, there's no common understanding that we need to hold ourselves to any universal standard. And, you know, that was really disappointing. And I think now we are in a situation where, look, you have the most reasonable people on the left will not admit things that 90% of people think are true, such as, you know, you can't have biological males compete with women, right? These are things you couldn't get a single vote for that in the Senate or the House. And so I think our political class is just lost to reality in all kinds of ways. And I think that makes it really hard to even dialogue with people across differences, because the differences are not, well, how should we deal with this? The differences are, will you acknowledge reality? Right. And that's a, you know, and that kind of is my threshold for, look, we can have disagreements of all kinds, even extreme ones, right? You can be the most extreme person on any given issue and be perfectly willing to acknowledge reality. But I think acknowledging reality will often temper extremism, but it doesn't have to. I mean, we can have all kinds of really raucous disagreements, but what we can't have is increasingly large numbers of people on both sides of our politics and running the mainstream who just decide not to deal with what they find.
What is the mainstream now?
So I think that's really the biggest thing that's happened is we're now so siloed that there are multiple mainstreams. I think that's been the biggest change since Trump came back into power. Does that make sense?
Like, I think it's like I mean, this goes to the whole idea of like 2 Americas, but because people always talk about the mainstream and I'm like, yeah, but Rogan is mainstream. You know, these people have much larger audiences than the mainstream. So I feel like we need to redefine what mainstream even is.
So I think that the institutions that touch everybody's lives, right, are largely educational
I think you need to write a piece
and medical,
about this,
right? The eds and meds kind of. Thank you. Thank you. I think the eds and meds are both, and I will write a piece of this. I think they are both in thrall to what was the liberal consensus as we went into COVID, if that makes sense. So I think they are both still in thrall to the sort of, we have the moral clarity, we have the moral authority. There are those that aren't going to listen to us. So I think you have that aspect of things where the sort of left mainstream, which has now been beaten back to an extent by not so much by Trump himself, but by the increasing coolness, shall we say, of some of the Trump coded.
I think
culture,
I think
right?
that might be like a one-hit wonder.
I think it's I think that's possible. I do think that's possible. But I think that you do have that sort of lefty mainstream is still the thing that touches everybody's lives. But I think that increasingly people recognize how out of touch they are. So you are, if you are at a big state university, let's say, you are going to face professors who will not dissent from the orthodoxies of, say, 2020 in all kinds of respects, teaching students, 50% of whom are just there to get their degree and have now moved on from even being vulnerable to it. So I think the splintering among young people, and I don't know if, I know you talk about your nieces and nephews, right? Like they have pretty good heads on their shoulders compared to some of the younger millennials with respect to this stuff. I know you've mentioned, like, I think that's becoming more common among those really young people, the teens, the 20-somethings. But on the other hand, I want to say, I don't necessarily think it's great to have two completely separate medias, because the right, of course, is vulnerable to all kinds of excesses. Right. I mean, we talked a little about the tradwife stuff, but beyond that, they're vulnerable to dogmatic orientations toward Christianity when those people get the microphone, right? They're vulnerable to all kinds of really problematic ways of being that sort of make the price of having gotten rid of some of the more moral assumptions around quote unquote equity, right? Which really was a way of doing like oppression stuff, is diversity and inclusion of the good kind, right? Like diversity and inclusion are good as long as you don't weaponize them. And the expectation that they're going to be eradicated in other ways is there on parts of the right, especially the extreme right, especially the online right. And I think that's scary. And on the left, the center has not held, right? I mean, how do you have not a single lawmaker willing to say what everybody thought was reality 10 minutes ago?
Yeah, this has been a piece I just wrote for Spectator that's not out yet, but it's about but the right. And it was essentially our kind of default ideology in this country is now you can go as far left. There's no stop to how far left you can go. No one is going but the left. Like the right is doing this, but the left. It's not the default. The default is, well, that's the side of progress. Progress is always good. There's no excess that is too far left that we aren't going to counter, especially coming from the left. And I think this is why they haven't held, because they can't help but clear their throat and go, but the right, like January 6th, like a tick or something. Yeah. And you're like, how, guys, at what point do you take some stock and look at your own side before you are, butt trumping, but the right? And it leads to a left that I have no idea what the left stands for at all anymore. I don't even know if they know what they stand for.
I was going to say, I listened to, I'm working on a piece about this. I'm about to finish up. I listened to Ezra Klein on Ross Douthat's podcast, right? The sort of liberal pundit Ezra Klein, who took a lot of heat from his own left-wing compatriots about saying that he thinks not only was political violence always bad, which, about half of the left will still say that, but also that Charlie Kirk was practicing politics the right way. Right. And by that, he didn't mean that he had the right positions or that he agreed with him. He meant using words, not coercion. Right. And he got a lot of heat from that, from the left. And when pushed, he, condemned that. And he basically said, no, I think I'm right. Doubled down. But what he couldn't do in any of the conversations he had with right-wing people, Ben Shapiro, Ross Douthat, et cetera, was articulate any vision for the left that had any center to it at all. And I don't mean center like centrist. I mean, had any idea of what it's for. And I think that a lot of this is, to an extent, secularization, right? Because when we lose some common idea of what is moral, then we lose a common idea of what we're fighting for, right? What are we looking to be? We're diverse and inclusive, and in his telling, prosperous, right? He wants us to be so that we can what? For what reasons? Right? Oh, so that we can get married and have children. Oh, no, we don't want to tell people to do that. Okay, well, so that we can raise people who are patriotic. Well, no, we don't want to tell people to do that. Well, so what's the goal here? And I think one of the dangers is that the left is unwilling to broadly condemn the fundamental immaturity and hollowness of the people to their left, right? Because they never want to say, oh, I'm not being inclusive. Right. And then on the right, and I wrote a piece about this, I think there's a grave temptation on the right to do exactly the same thing. And I think you're starting to see that happen to an extent. I think that one of the interesting things is that Trump, for all of his, limitations and all of his excesses, which are many, is very old, right? So he's old. So there are things that he still does and says that sort of are like, well, as unconventional as he is, he thinks it would be good if Iran didn't have nuclear weapons. He thinks it would be good if we didn't, things like that. Where like you look at the younger people on the right and you say, oh my, this is going to get very dangerous very quick because they have no guardrail. Right. And you can blame him for being the one who ushered that in.
I don't.
But he is, I mean, someone could, right? But I'm saying like you have to acknowledge regardless that that's what's coming. Yeah. And that is going to be really dangerous. In part, even more dangerous in some ways, because the left, in my view, basically they can destroy. They can destroy and destroy. It's really hard for them to create because to create, you need hierarchy. On the right, they can create and they can destroy and create. And they are sort of, if you look at these like Bronze Age pervert people and these people like, the Andrew Tates and the Pearl Davises, they're tapping into some things that are true, but really, really dark and sort of pre-Judeo-Christian and pre-civilization, but that have a grounding in a really dark and pagan kind of truth that on the left, there's just no truth at all, right? It's just all completely nonsense. So I think in some ways, the left's limitation is that they always eat their own, that they always go further and further, that it always becomes nonsense. And so people always are saying, well, wait, what? You want me to think what? You want me to say what? But on the right, there's ways in which it's almost more dangerous in the long run because they are channeling some things that are really, really dark and perennial.
Can you give me some examples?
Yeah, I mean, this idea, let's go back to this women idea, right? Marriage is bad for men and really we're evolved for polygamy. And so I could make, right, you could make an argument that that's true, right, to an extent, right? Obviously, marriage is actually good for men and there's all kinds of reasons to think that. But if you look at the way they're thinking about it, right, if you look at their orientation to the world where, well, the strong man, the tribal sort of strong man is the apex of everything and we're pre-civilized. Civilization has emasculated and civilization has domesticated and weakened the male spirit, right? This sort of celebration of untrammeled masculinity.
Is this like Andrew
is
Tate
really dangerous.
And the guys who talk about Andrew the Longhouse and everything?
Exactly. The Longhouse guys, Andrew Tate, Pearl Davis, the female influencer who kind of gives them cover by being female, right? And basically is saying, oh, men who get married are suckers, right?
These people all seem like these parodies to me, though.
People.
Like that. It's like, this is the other thing that worries me in the influencer culture. Like the incentives are so bad. And the incentives are that the more extreme you are, the more attention you get. And also because it's they're big clubs of people who are friends and you need to know certain people to get on to sell a book or whatever. The incentives to not call each other out are not there either. So it's like you have this ecosystem that is increasingly getting worse and worse because everybody's friends. Nobody wants to step on any toes. If you're already huge, you're trying to maintain your relevance. That's generally by, my husband always talks about this and he's so brilliant. He should be the one doing this, not me, which I realize is sexist, but he's so brilliant at watching all of this and analyzing it. And he's like, let's say there's a scale. And there are people who are 1 or 2 on this scale. They're reasonable. They've got massive audiences and they're willing to quote Candace Owens or call her brilliant or talk about what she's talking about, but
Yep.
they're never going to have her on their show because they don't want to sully their appearance with that, but they'll still reach up and steal some of that clout and by quoting her, but they don't actually have the courage to have her on the show. And there's so much of this going on where it's like you have wacky people saying crazy things, some that are based in some truth, some that have a kernel of truth that seem quite destructive to movements in general and are tearing apart the fabric of movements on both the left and the right. And then you have reasonable people who are willing to just reach up and grab that apple from the tree and shine it off and take a bite of it, but they don't actually have to like have the snake on their show. It's just like,
and on top of it, and on top of it, you have the 15-year-old kid with unfettered access to YouTube who maybe is having some popularity struggles or whatever, and is completely vulnerable to all of this because they have no center that exists in the real world, which we have hollowed out because we've weaponized these opposing forces. And we're fighting about influencing instead of actually doing the things that might help that kid be able to stand on their own 2 feet. You know, like I said, I have four sons. And when I think about how are we going to protect them, right, from these opposing forces? My husband is the son of Liberian immigrants. He grew up in inner city Cleveland and, you know, kind of made his, you know, trek up the professional, you know, ladder through law school and all this kind of stuff. And so they have sort of the virtues of immigrant story, right? In the sense of like America is still the greatest place in the world. And, you know, they have, which, you know, for his family, it has been. And on the one hand, and then on the other hand, you have the things that they have been exposed to and experienced, even though they are not exposed to it in the life we've sort of curated for them. They're in Catholic school, you know, but like you go to the YMCA and you're exposed to things, right? And so when we think about how are we going to, in some sense, inoculate them from these sorts of ways. And I don't know if you think about this with your daughter yet. I know she's pretty young. But the thing that really comes to mind is the way you inoculate them from the left is through the cultivation of their reason. Because the stuff that it's said is so bananas, right? And so obviously crazy that, you know, being able to tell the wheat from the chaff on that side is pretty easy in a sense. People who can do that, of course, will never make any progress on the left, influencing or in politics or anything else. But like, if you can tell, like, oh, this seems like a reasonable idea, we should have more unions. Oh, this is a really bad idea, we should have, you know, 97 gender identities and, you know, have unions where teachers can't be fired for any reason. Those seem like bad ideas, right? So like, it's cultivation of reason. But then how do you protect them from the right? And to me, the thing that really stands out is the cultivation of ethics and morality. And for us, at least, that comes, I don't know how you do it without a religious framework. And so I think this sort of like post-Christian pagan bro stuff is really attractive if everything you're handed in school is like obviously false, right? If the ideas about life that you're handed are hollow, right? And then you see, oh, well, this seems to have some truth to it. Well, that's really dangerous. And the way that at least we intend to protect our kids is, you know, church and morality. And, you know, that doesn't sound very Christ-like to me, right? There's a gentleness and a compassion that you want to cultivate without veering into the type of, you know, quote unquote, toxic empathy. But at the same time, it is so, so important to cultivate that through a foundation of truth and intellectual seriousness. Because if you don't, I think it falls apart. And in a country where we are increasingly secular, I think it's falling apart for a lot of people. For girls, at least as far as I look at my peers and I imagine, you know, younger women, a lot of it's the more emotional hijacking, right? That can make you vulnerable in ways that I think that's why young women trend to the left, because they're who's good at that.
Yeah, I think the more I learn about Charlie, the more I realize what a loss it is for the right wing, actually. And I was listening to a podcast this morning with, and I've seen what's happened in the wake and everybody, like so much of it and this is what the young people don't understand, and people who aren't in the industry understand, and people who don't have background access to a lot of what goes on, is just fighting for market share. Like, that's so much of what's happening, and it's positioned in the guise of like, we're the moral ones, we're the cool ones, and it's really just like jockeying for, audience and relevance. And it's so gross. It is so gross. And Charlie was truly, he had the intellectual and moral fortitude to navigate keeping these kind of two coalitions on the right that are really at war with each other right now. He had the ability to keep them together to some degree, and was able to navigate. He was a big enough person to manage that, but I don't see anybody on the right who's able to do that. I don't. There is literally no one who can fill his shoes. There's no. The center won't hold on the right either. It's actually, I'm
No,
not optimistic
no.
about it. And
Well, the
go
minute,
on.
yeah. No, I was going to say, the minute you try to do that, right, if you weren't sort of grandfathered in through sort of an organic process, the minute you attempt to say, marriage is not feminization, it's good for men, and here's why, you're a sucker, right? If you're also saying the other things that are on the right. And then, on the left, of course, they cancel you for any amount of dissent, right? Like, look at Bill Maher, right? Look at the people on the left who who themselves identify as on the left. So I think you're absolutely right. I think you make a really good point that essentially cancel culture is coming for the right, right? It's been coming for a long time, but it's only going to get worse as they splinter more and more if there are fewer and fewer figures that can hold together things.
Yeah, and have like the moral fortitude and the strength to stand up to that and say, no, I know these people don't agree, but we're going to put them, we're still putting Tucker on, for example, because I feel like we need to represent his views, and he represents a lot of people's views, and let's like debate it and have it out in open conversation. But now, in that absence of somebody like Charlie, what happens to people who oppose Tucker? Like what happens to them? Because Tucker's a much stronger force of personality and energy and audience. And so what happens to the smaller voices that might push back against this, or might want to debate it? Do they still get stage time, or do they just get pushed out?
Well, I mean, this is the siloing, right? I mean, this is the siloing. When you talk to sort of a mainstream left person, I don't mean an activist, I just mean a normal person who's in blue Philadelphia, right? They didn't know about the thing that happened on that train in Charlotte, where the guy who'd been released 14 times slit that girl's throat. They literally didn't know what happened because it never came into any of their media at all, like in any way.
They
right?
weren't aware that America was on the verge of a race war the day before Charlie was tragically murdered.
Like they literally didn't know it occurred, right? Now, if they knew it occurred, perhaps they would have, things to say, but they literally didn't know it occurred. And then on the right, you have similar things. Now, I am surrounded more by the normie left, and my relationship to the right. You're in Texas, where I assume it's pretty purple where you are, right? Because you're like near a city, but it's purple. And my husband grew up in Cleveland, where like it's quite purple. The city's blue, but like the suburbs are purple and certain neighborhoods are purple. And so it's a different reality. But in Philly, it's not. I mean, you got to go pretty far out for it to be purple. So I'm surrounded by sort of the normie left, most of whom, by the way, are pretty sane. They literally don't know what the left itself says about things, right? And if you present them with it, a lot of them say, "Wait, what?" It's like, yeah, no, they said that tests were racist. Like, wait, they said what?
They all need to watch Dumpster Fire.
I mean, I've had this conversation.
Did they
Yeah, they
know?
do. I mean, I've had this conversation.
This is my question to you, as someone who's surrounded by lefties. Do they? Because I have friends who have said, I have been shocked at people celebrating this murder who are friends of mine openly.
Yeah.
At what point do you
Yeah.
look around as a normie liberal and go, am I the baddie? Like, what does this,
Yeah.
does it create any sense of self-reflection at all?
So I think part of the problem is I think that there are ways in which the right has forfeited credibility. I mean, Trump has not been a kumbaya, welcome to me kind of person, right? So I think that there are ways in which they feel like, there's nowhere else to go. Like you're here regardless. But I think that the siloing of the media and the lack of any standard for what gets to get out there, right? How did we, I mean, not to go back to our earlier conversation, but how did we get to a point where gentle parenting was like the thing? It's like a bunch of TikTok people, saying stupid stuff who have one 6-year-old that they spend 3 hours talking about their feelings all day. I mean, what does this even mean? Right. The lack of barriers to entry for influence is one of the huge problems, right? So the people they're listening to are people that have no particular credibility. And then the people who they're pointed to look at on the other side are equally bereft of any, credibility or sanity or, normalcy. And so, because both sides of the media, they do this thing where hey, look at this crazy person in this place. And it's, one person, right? So I think that's a huge piece of it. So they just stick with what they know. But then the other piece is when I've had that conversation with people, I haven't talked to so many about this fact that 40% of, self-identified Democrats celebrate political violence, right? I would promise you, though, based on other conversations I've had, they don't know it because they don't celebrate political violence, right? So they're like, well, I think it's horrible what happened to him. I might disagree with everything he said, but I think what happened is absolutely horrible. And that's the view that they assume everyone they know shares. So it doesn't need to be discussed. I mean, I've been in those rooms where it's like everyone assumes that, anyone who doesn't get the COVID vax is crazy. And so it's not a thing that even needs to be discussed, right? Which, okay, I mean, I guarantee there's other people in that room who don't think so, but put that aside. But for example, on the stuff with tests, I have had friends who are like, normally, they vote Democrat the way they root for the Phillies, right? It's just what you do. They did not know that this, what do you mean there's no tests? I mean, people who literally had children go through the school district in my very diverse blue, neighborhood. And their younger kid comes along and they're like, wait, why aren't there any tests? And I'm like, oh, you didn't know there was this whole big national fight over this and tests are racist now? And they're like, what? Wait, where do your kids go? Can you send me the thing for the Catholic school? Right? That's what literally I've had that they don't know.
Yeah. What do you think happens? Where are we in
terms of
in a year?
I don't think anything good. Unfortunately, I wish I could offer. I wish I could offer
just an harbinger of what's to come. I just sat down with Andrew Doyle a couple days ago because he's in town.
And, I saw that.
It's oh shit, he's just so brilliant. But you're I was even still, as much as I know, there's so much that I don't know. And he was yeah, we have separate courts for Sharia law in the UK. I was what? How did that happen?
Yeah.
And my friend today was yeah, they're trying to do that in Dearborn, Michigan. I'm what? What is going on?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what do you think? I think that unless people, to an extent, are able to build without engaging the discourse, right? Or are able to marginalize from the discourse, unless the left is willing to police the left and the right is willing to police the right, we are nowhere in terms of the discourse, right? And I don't see that happening. I mean, I'm literally writing a book about why I think it should happen, and I hope it happens. But sort of this idea that we need to restore the American adult who is capable of holding two thoughts in their heads at once. That's what I think would save the country, right? A sort of Tocquevillian understanding of the American character. But we're getting pretty esoteric and philosophical. On the ground, I think that the biggest enemy to my mind is the tech and how young people get immersed in it. So I think the John Haidt move to try to reduce the influences of this stuff on people's brains until their brains are developed is very, very good. I think that's a good thing. But I don't think that that alone can solve the problem, because there's a moral hollowness. When politics becomes your religion, or it becomes your identity, or you're more worried about like whether you're a trad wife or a girl boss than just like making the dinner you might actually want to eat, right? Like this is where I think we get lost in this like influencer labeling culture. I don't know. I mean, you have a really good beat on it. What do you think?
There are so many factors that are out of our control. There are things that could happen that would change everybody's paradigm overnight in the same way that Charlie Kirk, I think, did. My feeling about the discourse is my optimistic hope is that have you ever done improv? Okay, so in improv, there's like the general rule, yes, and you generally say, I'm from Mars. And then you go, yes. And now we're going to, you yes, and you add more information. But even within improv, there are rules that keep you grounded. And one of the big rules is do not get on the bus to Crazy Town. And I think we've been kind of yes anding on both sides enough that like both sides are starting to and this is me talking about in the podcast world, I'm not talking about like things that happened. I mean, there are certain influences that are going on in our culture that are just too crazy for normies. And my experience of normies is that they took the bus to Crazy Town and it's too much. And people will go, oh, that's just normies wanting to maintain the status quo. And to that, I'll say, you're just a fucking, you don't have a family and you're not dealing with what these people are dealing with. People have, like me, aging parents, little kids, like trying to deal with bills and a business and whatever else is coming at us. And also raise good kids in this shit show. And so, yeah, you're going to reduce the amount of crazy. Some of it is toxic, and I do not let it in the same way that I think you should really pay attention. Like there should be a Maha movement, but for discourse. It's like we need to pay attention. I agree. Like our food is poisoned. I think this movement is good to pay attention to how over medicated kids are. I think the food in our culture we definitely should pay attention to. All of these things are, I think, good trends, even if they can also take the bus to Crazy Town. But then you need this also for your diet. Like, why am I listening to I'll talk to people who will be citing certain influencers and they're hearing their clips on TikTok and it's like, well, this person says this. I'm like, read a fucking book. Like, why don't you take this time to listen to a book on tape about the history of Greek thought or something, like anything that is more grounding than this nonsense that you're taking in. That's essentially like, it's weird too. A lot of the stuff that I see happening is like around Charlie Kirk in particular, because true crime is such a huge genre among women that this has turned into like a weird way to pivot into like true crime stuff for people is not that surprising to me. It's like, of course you're going to try and turn this into this like massively popular genre online where and you can also make it political. So I think there's like the incentives are bad. And it's I'm just hoping, my optimistic hope is that people go, this is bad for me. Like even if it's interesting or entertaining, it's not good for me. But I also know we're kind of lazy. We like short form discourse. People don't want to take the time to read a book. And so that's where my Like, this is where the more I've seen of Charlie, the more I'm like, oh, what a lot. Like, he was doing the thing we should all be
Mm-hmm.
doing. So all I can do is just try and I was like, fuck, I'm gonna have to start going and talking to colleges, I think. Like, just to like get out there and talk to young people and be like, I have a crazy story.
Mm-hmm.
I've been lost in the wilderness. I could probably write a whole book on just my piece about regretting being a slut, and now they're not drinking at all.
That was a
Thank
great
you.
piece.
But I think, like,
Yeah,
I
that was a great
think,
piece.
he was doing the deal. He was getting out there, talking to people, giving them meaning, giving them purpose, giving them structure, and I guess that's my hope, is that people start tuning a lot of this stuff out and going, all right, well, the conspiracy theories were fun for a minute, but we don't actually have the luxury of entertaining this stuff. We need to deal in reality and
Yeah.
build something.
Yeah. I think one of the ways to think about this, and I've actually written this a while ago, thinking of ourselves as though we're in a technologically facilitated
That's
dark
how it
age.
feels.
And as though those of us who are interested in maintaining and carrying forward the torch of sanity and civilization and civility and decorum, right? All these things that can connect us with people who don't have to believe exactly the same things we do, who don't have to have exactly the same lives we do, right? The way to keep us from both dogmatism and nihilism, right, is the idea that you're keeping these things alive, this version of sanity and civility and what America was when it was sane and civil, and yet also quite pluralistic and diverse and inclusive and all these things, keeping that alive for our kids and for their kids, because we're definitely going through a time right now where they're not
Yeah.
living well, right? Like, these virtues are not living well, but can you and I, keep it alive through the writing, through the children we're raising, through all these different things, and inspire other people to do. I don't literally mean just you and I, but I mean those of
It's
us
just us.
who are in this. Then we're done. Yeah,
We're
no,
fucked.
but I mean, but those of yeah, but those of us who are part of this, right? Like, is that how we see ourselves as what we're
I don't
doing?
know
And I
what
think to a
I'm
large
doing,
extent, it
honestly. I
is.
don't even know why I'm in this industry anymore. Every day I look online, and this is where my work is I'll go online and look at what's making millions of dollars and getting millions of views, and then I will say, I don't belong in this industry. I'm not sure what industry I belong in. I'm going to go get a job at Applebee's. Like, I don't.
Yeah, but this is exactly why it's important that you stay there.
And I didn't
I mean,
want to
that's why,
necessarily
right?
be, yeah, it's a, like, weird moment that I've had where I'm like, I don't think I belong here, but then I go back to the why. I have to keep returning to my why, which was to just have discussions with
Yeah.
people and why am I
Yeah.
doing this? Why did I build this? I built this like, why did I even start Phetasy in 2001 when I had the idea for this? It was to
Yeah.
help people feel connected, really. And really, it came from this idea of
Yeah.
greeting cards for people who came from broken homes, because I felt like they didn't really have a place in the greeting card aisle. And so it's just like returning to those roots, and instead of this is where I have taken so much from Charlie, like, learning what I've learned about him and his death. Unfortunately, I have to wake up and set that tone myself. So it's on me. This is what's so great about even his
Yeah.
most recent book. Like, what can I do to set that tone in my life? Well, instead of going online and doom scrolling immediately and making myself feel like I don't belong in this industry because it's all wackadoodles making millions of dollars, I can go online, say a prayer, look at like a Bible quote or a quote from, get back in touch with more of my recovery and remind myself of my why somehow, so that it's not that's on me, because that otherwise I'm going to get lost in the nihilism. And I think it's easy to do. I think it's like, especially in these times where uh I'm faced with I see the writing on the wall, and um yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that it's so tough. It's tough to like make sense of any of it. And then having a kid, makes me just remember that, like, that's it, you know? Like, being trying to build something better for her, teaching myself reason, ethics, logic, learning all this stuff all over again for her so that I can teach it to her and learn it with her. I think that's really what's grounding me. It's like I want to go back to the first principles. I think Dan Holloway was talking about this today on Twitter, and I shared it, where it's like we all need to just refamiliarize ourselves with first principles. And we all need to go back and read the source text for a lot of this stuff and the places where our civilization did spring from. That's what we should all be doing right now.
No, I completely agree with you. I mean, I think it's so important to have that individual accountability. But maybe my coming up in normie circles among Democrats makes me say, although with my more conservative values, but it's really important that we don't make our kids have to have those impulses as individuals. That's why it's so important to wrap the next generation in the structures and the social capital and the institutions that so many of us didn't have. And that's part of why we are so like going it alone in these ways. And maybe part of why the discourse is at the horrible pitch that it's at, in addition to like the technology came into something that was already empty for a lot of people, I think. And I think that's like part of what really made this as bad as it has been. And I think perhaps one of the most optimistic things I can say is I think there's a lot more awareness around that now among those of us who are actually having kids. I mean, we haven't even talked about like the number of us who aren't, which is a scary thing unto itself. But among those of us who, which is like very scary, right? But among those of us who are, I think there's more awareness around the need to facilitate the ability to get to a point where you are developed enough to have that individual accountability. Because, a 7-year-old who's on TikTok is already like, there's just no way for that to be managed well, right? They do not have the capacity. But a well-adjusted 27-year-old who wasn't on TikTok at 7 is much more likely to be able to do that in exactly the ways that you're talking about.
Right. Well, there's still so much I want to talk to you about. What do you think there is a revival?
Same. Boy, I don't know. It's funny, as a Catholic, right? I'm as distant from a lot of the aesthetics of that as a lot of people who maybe aren't religious at all are, which is crazy to say, because while I agree and identify with so much of the spiritual, the spiritual feeling, I have a hard time reading it in the way that I would read a text, if you know what I mean. So I think that I'm not probably the right person to answer, but I think that anything that gets people focused on what they actually are doing with their lives, the touch and grass aspects of things, right? The finding a life that gives you genuine peace, as opposed to that you feel the need to justify through whatever, you're making in terms of influencing. I think that's a good thing. I mean, I think, again, another thing we haven't even talked about is like the influence of AI.
Know. I was going to bring it up and then I was like, shit, I don't even know.
and how that's, I don't even, right. And how that's going to like deal with all this. But we need a revival of the virtues that can lead us to interact with each other in ways that respect each other. And, anything that does that, whether it's things that we stay away from, exactly as you were talking about, ourselves, and then try to keep our kids increasingly away from, or whether it's things that we engage, like, the drive to have a family. I think that those are, the best things we can be doing in terms of actually conversing with one another in real time, in real life. And I think that's why this podcast and is, this type of media is so valuable, because that's, what we're doing is when we're not having coffee, would have had fewer issues with technology if we were. But like, this is the type of conversation that you actually have with people you want to get to know, as opposed to that you want to get sound bites from. And I think that's what the long form podcasts from the decreasingly number of sane people that do them are valuable for.
It does feel like it's just a decreasing number.
Yes.
that's not me even tooting my own horn. I wish I could just lose my mind and make
No,
millions.
I agree with you.
It would be so much better for me.
I agree with you.
Uh,
I hear you.
there is a part of me too that's like, I don't yeah, it's just I get it. Like, I saw a lot of people yesterday because I was raised Catholic, so I love a old creepy church with lots of chanting and stained
Yeah.
glass.
Yep.
And, like,
Exactly.
I'm in Texas
Yeah.
now, so it's like churches and strip malls, like, I don't fucking get that at all, but they're
Yep.
literally the
Yeah.
nicest people I know in the entire world
Yeah.
go to that
Yeah.
these churches,
Yep.
and the most
Yeah.
loving with the sweetest
Yep.
kids and just, like, the best hearts, and I've been to these big mega
Yeah.
churches too, and I think a lot of again, we talk about this kind of everything being mediated. So you had
Mhm.
gospel, which I'm able to kind of separate the message from the messenger just from being in AA for 12 years. Like, there's a lot of really great
Sure.
messages from some crazy ass people in those rooms, but you gotta be able to, like,
Right.
pull it apart. And,
Yep.
that's
Yeah.
not everybody can do that, but I can understand the, like,
Yeah.
mega church meets influencer aesthetic being kind of like, "Whoa, what the fuck?" If you have never been to a mega church and you've never
Yeah.
so it's like gospel, influencer, mega church vibe. I can see why people this is super normal for millions of Americans, by the way.
Totally. Yeah. It's so being from the East
Totally.
Coast, right? Obviously, Catholicism is my normal.
Yep,
I'm Catholic. But my husband's from the Midwest, where, I totally get that the Protestant is
yep,
the normal, right? And the whole Catholic Church there has a whole different feel because there's a sense of it being a minority
yep.
community, right? So it's a really different feel there when you go to Catholic Church. But no, I've been to some mega churches. I totally get the Americanness of a lot of what happens there, and I think that anything that moves people toward understanding each other is usually good. I think that part of the problem we have in this time is that we see things refracted through like, exactly as you were saying, these like short soundbite clips and these short, like, it's very different to go somewhere and experience it versus to see, the
Yeah.
sound bites. Whatever the place is, right? For the most people in the country who've never been to a Catholic church, right? Same thing. Like, to see the sound bites, you're like, what is going on here with this chanting and this, but if you actually go and you experience it as a whole, it's a very, very different thing. And so I think, I grew up in a place where there's a ton of synagogues. My oldest kids actually went to daycare at one, and anything like that, right? If you experience it, you can find the commonalities and the universal impulses that, connect us. But we are, as you've so eloquently laid out, we are part of a media and a wider culture now that seeks to divide us because that's where the dollars are. And I think that, has been really bad for us as a culture. And I hope that those of us who are getting wise to it, find the places where we can meet with each other and actually know each other. And like I said, that's what this long form podcasting is so important for. But it's also important that people engage each other in real life. Again, another thing we didn't get into is like dating, like that people don't do that now, not mediated through some app, which, is something that's not good.
Yeah, but it was even when I was getting close to being at like, before I met my husband, and this was in probably like 8 years ago. Still, it was like creepy if somebody came up to you and like, the younger people were like, "That's just creepy
Right.
if somebody's coming up to me and talking to me at a bar without having, like,
Yeah.
first met me in a."
Yeah.
So they don't even I don't know,
Yeah.
they want that kind of filter. They're like, "What are you, a serial killer? Like, why aren't
They,
if somebody doesn't have an online."
yeah. But then we wonder, yeah, and then we wonder why they don't know how to do talking with
Right.
people, right? Like, why there's such a lapse in their ability to make conversation. And a lot of it is because, there's people who are, I heard from someone who does admissions at a small college in this area that there were people going to college, we're talking about 18-year-olds, whose parents were ordering for
Yeah.
them, like
Yep,
at
yep.
restaurants, because it makes them uncomfortable to speak to the waiter. I mean,
But this is
not
basic
tenable.
parenting. We do this with our kid. We're like, we make them say goodbye
Yes.
to the grandparents, look them in the eye, hug them
Yes.
every time they leave. We make them look
Yes.
the person in the eye. If
Yes.
we're at a restaurant,
Same.
she's 3 years old. This is just like basic
Same. Yep.
parenting. I don't feel like if you're doing that with an 18-year-old, you didn't do what you should have done when they were 3 years old. Like, sorry. This is stuff
I
that
could
you
not
just
agree with you
train
more.
to your kid. Someone says goodbye to you, you don't go
Yeah, I
bye
could not
and,
agree
like,
with you
look
more.
down. You turn around, you make eye contact with them.
Yeah.
Just, like, keep reinforcing that. I
Yeah.
don't know why
Yeah.
this seems like basic stuff.
So I totally agree with you. But I have never been as piled on X as I was when I said that it's okay to tell your 3-year-old to say goodbye to grandma and give her a hug. Right? Because there's this like, well, she doesn't want to. That's not what she wants to do right now. That's perpetuating a type of, way somebody could be abusive, et cetera. And I'm like, hold on. We are talking about your grandmother in the foyer next to her mother. We are not talking about some creepy man at school. Like, well, how will she know the difference? It's like, because you'll tell her the difference. And also the intuition, right? People have intuition that tells them there's a difference, right? But these concepts, when they're disconnected from reality, because we live, again, increasingly anomically, and we don't have the density of interactions that we once did. And so it's like, wait, we're now talking to a generation of parents who are afraid that if they tell their kid, go hug grandma, she's going to be vulnerable to abuse, more vulnerable to abuse than she. That's crazy. Okay. Like the mental leaps you have to make. But that was like the dominant take of the people who were like, I feel sorry for your children. You don't respect their autonomy. It's like, well, first of all, they're 4. So when it comes to me and their grandmother, they have no autonomy. Okay. But secondly, that has nothing to do with whether they are, I mean, you would have to eradicate all of their normal impulses in order for that to have anything to do with them being vulnerable in completely other contexts. But people don't recognize these basic things, I think, because of the extent to which they're not interacting with people face to face, and they're not interacting in the kinds of familial settings that have been normal until
we
so
live in
recently.
such a normal, like, it's very chill. Like, you see kids riding around on their bikes. It's very, there's a sense of like having, I just wanted her to have like a similar childhood to like I had, as much as that's possible. I mean, it's somewhat not because of technology, but I think the thing that I've been just most obsessed with is how we've all bought into a surveillance state, and there's really no way out.
Oh my gosh.
Like,
I totally agree with you. And that starts, that safety is a level of parenting for sure.
And so, this has been fascinating and amazing. And what's your biggest defective character?
Oh, thank you so much. I would say I'm impatient. And I would say that as a kid, I was a perfectionist procrastinator, the type, like, it's like, I'm going to get it done perfectly, but I'm not going to start now. And obviously parenting has decreased my procrastination and my perfectionism, because it has to, unless you're going to drive yourself absolutely insane. But it has not decreased the impatience that led to those things. So I find myself, often frustrated in that way. And what's really funny is my second kid, similar to you, we live in a place where we've tried to recreate a lot of those, abilities for them to have some autonomy in those ways. And he is like me, like exactly. So when I watch him get impatient because he can't control where everyone's going to go or what everyone's going to do, like, I'm glad he has the autonomy to put himself in that position, but I like feel for him, and it gets me so frustrated. And it's horrible it's horrible, also great, but also horrible when you see yourself reflected and you're as annoyed with the kid as you are with your 8-year-old self. So, that's been an interesting way to increase my self-awareness without actually helping myself in any way.
What's your biggest asset?
I would say persistence. I would say that they kind of go together, right? Like I'm not the type of impatient where I'm easily frustrated when it doesn't go right. But my husband will tell you that I've rearranged the furniture in our house like 19 times without his help, because I was like, I'm not going to wait till you're available, so I'm just going to get it done, which is, a combination of impatient and persistent. But I definitely think that every virtue has its vice and the opposite.
Where can we find?
So, how about yourself? You probably answered this question.
My
sorry.
biggest asset. I think right now it changes probably all the time. I'm really curious, like I let my, and I'm open to being wrong. Like, I've been saying a mob is a mob is a mob, and this is something now I'm like, is it though? Like, I'm not actually sure that it is, because I think when you get in a mob, you are likely to behave like the mob. So when you're actually touch grass in a mob, or even virtually part of a mob, something happens to your brain and like you lose your mind. That I still concede. Now, what I've seen post Charlie's death is that one mob burns places down and other mobs have candle vigils in response to one of their, like, quote unquote heroes being murdered. So now I'm questioning that. Now I have to really like sit back and be like, well, do we consider these mobs? Like, it's definitely pushing up against something that I would have stood by, and now I'm not sure. And my religion is ever changing, I think. Like, I won't
Interesting.
I won't tell the full story, but the day that this is just a crazy anecdote. I got baptized the day that Charlie was killed, before he was killed.
Oh my gosh.
And it's fucking with me. It's really fucking with me.
Oh my gosh.
Because
congratulations,
it was just
by
like
the
a
way.
rebaptizing, because I was too young, and so yeah, that's kind of messing with me, because now there's been this like huge revival since then, and I'm like, this is awkward. Like,
am I central to this?
To be religious? Like, and definitely getting sober has, I got far away from Catholicism, and then I came back to some version of, like, when I got sober, it was like I flinched hearing the Lord's Prayer. I could not hear it. And then I had a sponsor who was like, read some Emmett Fox. He breaks down why this is a very important prayer just for like all people, and why it's lasted the time, and talks about how each thing means metaphorically. And then it was like a God of your understanding, and I just made it dogs, because I really couldn't handle the concept of God. So I also understand people when they hear God flinching. Like, I get that, because I have been there. And then I kind of had to baby step my way back in. And I've been thinking a lot about my conversation with Allie Beth Stuckey when I was pregnant, actually. And she and I were talking about my whole story, meeting my husband, having a baby. And she was like, well, this sounds like God working in your life. And my husband asked a question of me a long time ago when we were, we met in sobriety. And he was like, all right. Because I'm like, the logical part of my brain can go, rejects a lot of this. It's like, this is, and it does feel like rise of religion, like lack of science and reason, dark ages. Like, this is how my brain wants to put this all in the same bucket of the dark ages.
Sure.
And kind of anti-reason. But my husband's like, look, on a personal level, are you better? What version of you is better? The better of you that believes in God, or the version of you that doesn't? And that was like such a simple, easy question for me to answer. It is easily the person that believes. Now I could go down a rabbit hole of why that might be. But yeah, it's definitely messing with me like that. It feels like it's just kind of open. And I joked on Dumpster Fire that I was going to be sitting there with like a little cross. I'm like, we moved to Texas. It's only a matter of time before I'm like telling you all to find Jesus. And now I'm like, oh shit. I feel like I'm one step away telling everyone to find
Yeah.
So yeah.
The podcast could morph. You could have a second act. Yeah.
Just like
wow.
the dumpster fire of the Lord.
Yeah. Right,
so yeah, there's this part of me that's that's very feisty, and it pushes back against it. I find this moment hard for me to manage, and so like as I always say, Jack Kerouac quote, I have nothing to offer the world but my confusion. Although I don't think the world needs confusion right now. I think the world really needs clarity.
But that's a curiosity. Curiosity is a great place from which to sit to do what you do, though. I don't know if you heard the Monica Guzman book. It was called I Never Thought of It That Way. And she's like this liberal with Oh, you had her on. I don't know. I missed that. How did I miss that one? I gotta go back. Long ago. Okay, I was gonna say because I didn't hear of her till I read the book. But I'll have to go back and find that one because I thought that was almost an ode to curiosity, right? Which is a super important asset for the type of real conversations as opposed to people just like firing, sound bites back at each other.
Yeah, I have a joke in my stand-up where I'm like, if you had told me that I would get sober and 12 years later I'd be a Texas suburban mom, I never would have got sober. I just am constantly, I think, having to remain open, having to remain curious, having to, I do just like that. That's probably my biggest asset. My biggest defect at the moment is, I think the opposite side of that would be arrogance. I feel like just there's certain people where I'm like, no, they're just wrong. Like they're wrong and they're doing bad faith things. And I don't know that. I think another thing I really took from Charlie is that he truly offloaded his judgment to God. So he was like, that's why he was able to have these conversations with people, because he was like, it's not for me to judge. It's not for me to judge whether this person is like destroying the fabric of America or not. It's just for me to try and listen and allow God to judge that person. It's not for me to judge. So I think it's like maybe being judgmental, I guess, is my big defect that I'm working on at the moment. Failing, by the way.
Those are thought provoking. Those are thought provoking ones because those are ones that judgmental and arrogant. I could sign on to those as potential defects as well.
So
yeah, for sure.
That's the thing. I mean, I understand where people are coming from, being like battered by both sides through 10 years. I get it. And I heard something. Gavin McInnes came back on Twitter. They let him out of his cage. And he had this tweet that was going viral. He was like, yeah, I'm a hypocrite. We wanted to cancel this comedian. And he's like, and I don't give a fuck. This is fucking war. And I was like, I'm not going to lie. I kind of feel that. Like I kind of know where he's coming from. So I get it. I get it. I get that. But I don't know that that's helpful in toning things down.
Well, the one thing I'll say is I have a piece where I did this, but my kids make fun of Daniel Tiger because they have that jingle like when you're so mad you want to roar, take a deep breath and count to 4, right? And like we joke because my second kid is like, he's the one who's the more like sort of typical masculine, like aggressive one. If he would be not mad anymore after he counted to 4, like maybe 4,000, maybe 400, like who is this supposed to work for, right? This works for somebody who's not that mad. I would argue that in some ways, if you can't feel what people are actually feeling, you're ill-equipped to reason your way to a better conversation.
Yeah.
Right? Because like if you are completely like, oh, well, I can't possibly imagine feeling that way because I am all completely in my head and I have no natural impulses toward any such thing. Well, then like you're really not able to identify with and talk with people. I think it's being able to understand that you feel that way and then say, well, let me like think about that. Let me think that through. Let me question that. Let me think about why that, like that, I think is a much more helpful and more honest way to be than a lot of the ways that people are where they're like, oh, well, I could never. It's like, yes, you could. If you were honest with yourself about what your own impulses are.
I'm not sure I can underestimate how much I've been radicalized. I can't look around and go, all these other people around have been radicalized and I've just been immune to this process. I probably have, by becoming a mom has been radicalizing. Moving to Texas and being able to be a little bit more free in my speech and thinking because I'm not surrounded by people I have to walk on eggshells around has been liberating. So, but I'm losing family members. I'm getting text messages from family members telling me that, you know, they're done with me and that, like I'm destroying America. And this hasn't, I'll get emotional, but this hasn't happened to me for 10 years. And they don't listen to this podcast, by the way. They only see the clips.
Yeah.
So then I wonder, should I even be doing clips?
Of course.
But then I became a Charlie Kirk curious because of a clip that I saw of his. So I really, like, it was a clip of his that made me realize maybe I had him wrong. So I don't know. I don't fucking know.
Yeah.
Here's what I do know.
Bridget, I have to say, I have to say, I've heard other people tell me that, and it's so sad to me that we're at a place where people cancel their own family members over things they think. Like, have you said, oh, this person in my family should be canceled? No, of course not. You're not the one doing the canceling. And I think it's just so sad when that happens. And that also it does reflect a kind of immaturity that is endemic, right? I mean, like family cancellations, and it's not all over politics. I just saw a book about this come out. It's about everything. It's like these younger millennials and these Gen Zers or whatever, they cancel family over all kinds of stuff. And to me, that reflects the poverty of their minds, their souls, their understanding of the world. Because anybody who would think, oh, she is too dangerous to have around because she believes things I don't believe, right? Not she's leading an army to invade my home. Not she's right. I mean, that's crazy. And it's really, really immature and sad.
Well, I appreciate you out there in the discourse. I'm grateful for
Likewise.
you and your work, and let's keep in touch. Please tell everyone where we can find you.
Yeah, right back at you. Oh, thank you. I am on Substack. My Substack is called What Are Grownups For? Please subscribe free. And I'm on Twitter X at Elizabeth G. Matt.
Thank you so much.
So thank you for having me. It was a great pleasure to talk with you. I'm, like I said, a regular listener, and such a joy to be here.
Thank you for being here. This has been Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Phetasy. I'm Bridget Phetasy, and you're welcome. It's the dumbest line.